A growing number of Britons are voicing their fears that the country is gradually becoming an Islamic nation, a shift they deem unacceptable. This sentiment is echoed by prominent figures like Nigel Farage, who has openly expressed his concern that Muslims could dominate Britain by 2050.
We have a Muslim population in Britain growing by about 75% every 10 years. Right? That's just where we are. If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. We'll lose.
So how does one include
We will lose. By 2050, goodness knows what kind of a terrible state we're going to be in.
Farage's warning underscores a broader anxiety about the integration of Muslim communities and their increasing political influence in the UK. For many, the question is clear: is Britain still safe for its citizens, or is it losing its identity as a Christian nation? The streets of some British cities have become a focal point of this debate. In areas with high Muslim populations, the cultural landscape has shifted dramatically, with some neighbourhoods now resembling parts of Palestine rather than traditional British towns. Make your opinion count by liking this video and promoting it for more awareness. Also, share and subscribe to our channel for upcoming updates. Let's challenge the narrative together. You wouldn't see this in the mainstream media. The lack of integration has fueled fears that Britain is losing its cultural identity. Critics argue that the country's openness to refugees and migrants, while commendable, has come at a cost. Instead of fostering a harmonious multicultural society, they claim it has led to the creation of parallel communities that operate outside the mainstream British cultural and legal framework. The phrase "enough is enough" has become a rallying cry for those who believe it's time for Britain to prioritise its own interests and protect its heritage. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's recent comments about Islamophobia being a significant problem in Britain have added fuel to the fire.
We've seen a devastating rise in Islamophobia, leaving people feeling fearful and unsafe in their own country. I've heard firsthand of women wearing hijab who are too scared to travel by public transport, of Muslim families being abused as they leave the mosque. The surge in Islamophobia is simply appalling. Muslim women and girls disproportionately targeted, mosques forced to ramp up security, and British Muslims questioned as if they are terrorists. I do not want Britain to be a place where British Muslims are not able to be their whole selves.
While many agree that Islamophobia is a serious issue that needs to be addressed, others argue that the focus on Islamophobia overlooks the concerns of those who feel that British culture and values are being eroded. They question whether the government is prioritising the interests of immigrants over those of its own citizens, particularly when it comes to the preservation of British identity.
What is Labour's views about the Islamophobia and controlling the Islamophobia in Britain and Europe as well?
We have to defeat Islamophobia. We have to be honest enough to accept that it's on the rise and it spikes. And we have to speak with one voice in condemning that and taking effective action in relation to it. So we join together, we acknowledge the problem of Islamophobia and how widespread it is, but we are absolutely resolute in our commitment to defeat it.
The tension between addressing Islamophobia and preserving British cultural identity has become a contentious issue with no easy solutions in sight. One of the most alarming aspects of this debate is the reported incidents of Muslims rebelling on England's streets, demanding the establishment of a caliphate state and the implementation of Sharia law. For many Britons, these demands are seen as a direct threat to the country's Christian heritage and democratic values. The idea of Sharia law, which governs many aspects of Muslim life, is particularly controversial. Critics argue that it is incompatible with British values of equality, secularism, and individual freedom. They fear that the introduction of Sharia law would undermine the rule of law and lead to a fragmented society where different communities live under different legal systems. The frustration is compounded by the perception that such demands would not be tolerated if they were made by other religious or cultural groups. Critics point out that it is highly unlikely for Christians or Jews to demand the establishment of a theocratic state or the implementation of religious laws in the United Kingdom. This double standard, they say, is evidence of a broader trend where British values and traditions are being sidelined in favour of accommodating immigrant communities. Another contentious issue is the reported attempts by Muslim immigrants to convert British Christians to Islam, including children. There have been claims of Muslim individuals or groups approaching children in schools and on the streets, encouraging them to adopt Islamic practices and beliefs. For many British parents, this is a step too far. They argue that such actions are not only inappropriate, but also a direct threat to the cultural and religious identity of their children. The phrase invade, conquer, subdue and dominate has been used by some to describe what they see as a deliberate effort to spread Islam in the UK, often at the expense of other religions. The call to action is clear. Britain must start protecting its interests for a lasting peace. Many believe that the government needs to take a stronger stance to ensure that British culture and values are preserved. This includes enforcing stricter immigration policies, promoting integration, and ensuring that all communities respect the laws and values of the UK. There is also a growing demand for policies that prioritise the integration of immigrants into British society, rather than allowing the formation of parallel communities that operate outside the mainstream cultural and legal framework. The debate over the role of Islam in Britain is part of a broader conversation about immigration and its impact on society. While the UK has a long history of welcoming refugees and migrants, there is a growing sense that the current approach is unsustainable. Critics argue that the UK's open immigration policies have led to overcrowded cities, strained public services, and a loss of cultural identity. They believe that the government needs to take a more balanced approach, one that respects the rights of immigrants while also protecting the interests of British citizens. Supporters of immigration, on the other hand, argue that the UK's diversity is one of its greatest strengths. They point out that immigrants contribute significantly to the economy, culture and society, and that efforts to demonise or exclude them are counterproductive. They also emphasise the importance of addressing Islamophobia and ensuring that all communities feel valued and respected. However, they acknowledge that there is a need for better integration policies to ensure that immigrants are able to fully participate in British society while also respecting its values and traditions. The challenge for the UK is to find a way to balance these competing interests. On one hand, there is a need to address legitimate concerns about the impact of immigration on British culture and identity. On the other hand, there is a need to ensure that immigrants are treated fairly and that their contributions to society are recognised. This requires a nuanced and thoughtful approach, one that takes into account the concerns of all stakeholders and seeks to build a more inclusive and cohesive society. In conclusion, the debate over the role of Islam in Britain and the perceived erosion of Christian values is a complex and emotionally charged issue. While there are legitimate concerns about the impact of immigration on British culture and identity, there is also a need to ensure that all communities are treated with respect and dignity. The UK must find a way to balance these competing interests, ensuring that its cultural heritage is preserved while also embracing the diversity that has long been a hallmark of its society. What are your thoughts on this issue? Do you believe that Britain is losing its identity as a Christian nation, or do you see this as a necessary part of a diverse and inclusive society? Share your views in the comments below.